Henry Herring, and thanks for watching Our Global Voice Television. This episode features a dedicated man talking about a vital subject, education. My guest is Darryl White, and is a former high school principal. Now in his retirement, he commits a lot of his time to improving education outcomes by working with Sacramento's Black Parallel School Board. Let me say up front that I am a member of the Black Parallel School Board, but I'm interviewing Darryl solely because he is a prominent figure on education issues and on educating the black student. Darryl, thank you for doing this interview with me.
Not a problem, not a problem. Again, just to repeat, my name is Darryl White. Presently, I'm chair of the Black Parallel School Board. I run a nonprofit entitled the Sacramento Independent Learning Center, where I provide support to school districts, teachers, and other educational entities in terms of training. So I try to stay very active. I no longer am an administrator in the public school system. I've decided that my talents can be best served in other places.
Can you tell us how the Black Parallel School Board came to be?
Well, actually, the Black Parallel School Board started about 5 years ago in response to the dismal test scores that were being produced by African American children. It's very clear that if you look at it longitudinally, historically, that not much has changed since 30 years ago. And it seemed that things wouldn't change looking into the future if a group of individuals didn't take it upon themselves to say, hey, enough is enough, we need to do something. We need to be very positive force. We need to bring in skilled people who understand the phenomenon and see if we can't energize the community around a big movement to move forward.
Would you say that the powers that be were accepting of your entrance onto the stage, resisted in the middle?
It's always been an interesting dynamic. We work parallel with Sac City. We have since the very beginning. We have no interest presently in other students outside of Sacramento City. And when we began, it was, well, it's another organization. They probably won't be around long enough. And for 5 years, we persisted. And I think we now are a legitimate entity speaking on behalf of African American children and partnering very successfully presently with Sac City.
So maybe you can just give us maybe the top 3 things that the Black Parallel School Board does, the practical day-to-day things that they do on behalf of parents to further the organization, how they interact with it.
Well, first of all, what we do is we take a very good look at what's going on in the district relative to African American children. We understand the data, we research the data, and we tell it a little differently than school districts normally would tell the data, because we're specifically only interested in the lives of African American kids, academically speaking. And so we tell the story from that perspective. Relative to that, we do an annual report at the very end of the year. Hundreds of pages of what our thinking is at that particular time of what the data is telling us and the direction that we're going. The second thing that we do is we represent the parents in the community relative to African American kids. Parents have issues with the school, issues with individuals within the district. We provide support and assistance for those particular individuals. The third thing that we do is that we collaborate with the school district on topics of interest to both the Black Parallel School Board and school district. One such project has been zero tolerance, meaning suspension and expulsion. We've developed a partnership with the district, and we're moving forward to start providing some level of service to some of our schools to see whether or not we can make some impact.
2 things jump out to me as you were talking about that, and the first one is, maybe you could have these. One is, can you explain zero tolerance? Because there's probably some folks out there that just don't know exactly what it is. And then 2, can you talk a little bit about the dropout rate in maybe Sac City School District before Black Parallel School Board got involved, and then maybe where we are now?
Well, let's start with zero tolerance. Zero tolerance is a term. That's all it simply is. And it's a term that goes all the way back to drug interdiction. with Peter Nunez in San Diego, being close to the border. They wanted to come up with a policy and a plan to stop drugs from entering the U.S. from Mexico. And in order to do it, to show strength in doing it, he simply said, we will have zero tolerance for any kind of drugs into to America, to our shores. And the term became popularized. Edwin Meese, 5 years later, used the term actually in a policy of drug interdiction for U.S. policy in terms of trying to enact what is called gun-free school zone, 1994. And he said that we will have zero tolerance for guns on our campuses. And zero tolerance simply meant that any kid found in possession of a gun on any school campus would be expelled. And it was mandatory that a school expelled. And so, to get every school district to sign on, he gave them money. And then school districts wanting that money, and the fear of all of the school shootings at the time, there were about 115 school shootings of different types leading up to this decision. And so they all got on board with it. And so school districts around the issue of mandatory expulsion and guns on campus decided to expand. California expanded. They added drug offenses, all kinds of offenses to go along with the mandatory expulsion of students who brought guns to school. Now it became, you bring an explosive device to school. Now it became, if you had a fight where somebody was hurt, it was mandatory expulsion. Some certain drug offenses now became mandatory. The suspensions were totally crazy. We went through the roof. California last year suspended more students than they graduated. They discovered that those campuses where a lot of suspensions were occurring were right with students being out of control. I mean, it was very symptomatic of, you could go to a school and look at the suspension rates, and then that tells you what's going on the campuses. They found out that the school with the lowest suspension rate had the campuses that were productive with the higher scores. And so someone said, well, hey, California Endowment said, we got to do something about this. And California Endowment handles health kinds of issues. And they simply said, it's not healthy for a kid to be suspended or expelled. So they put a lot of dollars, a lot of money to generating enough interest in communities to start building around the whole idea. And as a result of that, and our involvement, we took 7 bills to the governor on suspension and expulsion. He signed 5 of them.
Now, when you say power involvement, which group are you talking about exactly?
Oh, I'm talking about our partnership with California Endowment around the whole subject of zero tolerance.
Okay. Let people know, where were we with African American dropout rate as the Black Carolina School Board stepped into this arena, and where are we now?
Well, when you look at dropout rate 5 years ago, we matched probably much of what was going on in California schools. Where we are now, there's been some headway. I mean, that's just being honest about it, but we're not where we want to be. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And dropout is only symptomatic of what's going on throughout the district. And when we look at what's going on with African American children, the dropout rate is only one small indicator. I mean, a very small indicator. The bigger indicator for us is the achievement gap, which means where are our highest learners compared to our lowest learners, which are African American students. What does that gap look like?
Okay, I want you to tell us about the achievement gap, because it looks like we're moving that direction, but when it comes to the dropout rate, you tell me that I'm way off, because as the Black Carolina School Board was coming on board, I believe data was showing that the dropout rate was about 1 in 3 African American kids. Now I'm thinking about
if you look at state data, it's probably more like 40 to 45% for African American students and close to 50% for Latino students.
Okay, and that's
statewide
data. That's statewide dropout. Like I said, I remember that. 34.9% for African Americans. That's basically 1 in 3. So that's in the ballpark. Just for our viewers,
exactly.
That's in the ballpark. I believe it's accurate, but that's in the ballpark. We can move on so they know the magnitude of what we're dealing with, and you believe there's some improvement, but a ways to go.
Yeah, I think we have a ways to go. That's enough that's very difficult to crack, because I don't think it's a programmatic issue. Because when we talk dropout, the assumption is kids are dropping out of the 12th grade. Dropout occurs a lot earlier. I mean, we have dropout, we can document dropout as early as 6th grade. And it increases every year from that place.
You were talking about the achievement gap. You want to explain what that is, maybe some highlights from there?
Typically when we talk about achievement gap, is that we look at state data. We have a reference point, whether it be white and Asian students or other students. We look at who this system is working best for. We use that as a backdrop, as a baseline. And then we compare every other student group to that baseline. Now, if one group is here and one group is down here, then the gap is in between. A good example would be the state wants every student to score at least 800 on the standardized test relative to the academic performance index. And that is just the number the state has decided that they want to use to determine how effective instruction has been at a particular school. And so the example would be, let's say we had a kid who scored at 800 and we had another kid that scored at 600. Well, the gap between the two kids would be 200 points. And so when you look at African American performance in our school district, we're anywhere from 100 to 150 points behind that standard score or that baseline score.
Okay. I believe I saw you making comments at the school board maybe last year, maybe 2 years ago. And what struck me is that there seemed to be no dispute from school board members and the school superintendent, school board superintendent. You said some numbers project it would take 42 years to close that gap at the rate that we're going.
Right.
I believe that was about 2 years ago. Did you see any significant progress that might suggest that, let's take a number, 10 years, that we might be able to close that gap in 10 years?
Well, the data we've seen so far is we've expanded the time frame for the gap. It was 42. Our latest research and the latest data is up to 72 years now. In 2 years, we've increased the amount of time that it would take to close the gap.
So we're not going in the right direction on that, and that's sad. What's wrong with our school? Why is this a problem?
To me, it's simple. Having been a high school principal, middle school principal, and spent a lot of time on an elementary campus, it's simple to me. I believe in what Wong says. Wong is a writer. He's an educator and a researcher on those matters that are educational. He puts together a pretty good book that I think that really supports and helps teachers. But he says the relationship between a teacher and student is paramount in moving a kid up from point A to point B. He says to a 93% rate of importance, rather than anything, besides anything else that occurs in the district. Which means this: if I am spending a lot of money bringing in commercial materials, thinking that that's going to make the change without impacting that relationship between teacher and student, I'm wasting money. We got to get practice to find a way, or I should say those people who are creating policy, to understand that the way to jumpstart the system is to take a real strong look at that relationship between teacher and student and put all of its focus, all of its energy into making that relationship the best relationship possible. If we can do that without all these other resources, we can move light years relative to that achievement gap.
Tell me about Race to the Top, and how does that play into maybe closing the achievement gap or improving our schools?
President Obama's Race to the Top idea was a great idea. I mean, he simply says, those schools that are doing the best work, the most innovative work, we're going to fund. I thought it was a great idea. Fortunately, California didn't participate, simply because they didn't have the support of the total educational community to make it happen. And let me tell you why, because I think it's a great story to tell.
Okay. No, let me just clarify. Sure. I'm not sure if I heard it correctly. Did you say it was fortunate or unfortunate?
It's unfortunate
that
California did not participate. And let me tell you why they didn't participate. Obama said that in order to participate, you have to have certain assessment tools and make those assessment tools available. For example, the state was working on two programs. One was called CalTIDES, the other was called CalPADS. CalPADS enables me, you, any citizen to go online, look at the data, move the data around, and see what story it tells. Because you don't always get the story of the data when it comes from the mouths of school districts, because they want to be impressive, like any institution that wants to be impressive. But CalPADS allowed any citizen to go in and take a look at it. Now, CalTIDES was another state program that had been in the works for a long time. But that program was going to show data, make it available at the teacher level. Simply meaning that I could now, as a citizen, go into my child's school, look at his teacher, and determine and see how well that teacher was effective, how effective the teacher was. I could, as a citizen, do that. Well, the unions in California said they didn't want that kind of information out there on the teachers. But that was a requirement to get the money. And so California said, we're not going to do that. Brown got rid of CalTIDES. And so we're not going to be a part of that. And to me, that's one of the downfalls of that whole Race to the Top thing. It should have been a selected group of districts. It should have been any district who wanted to be a part of it, I thought, for it to really be effective.
Talk a little bit about charter schools, why they're needed, and maybe how they can, if they can, fit into our society, our system, without causing too many problems.
Well, I'm a charter school advocate, first of all, and I've been for a long time. And I think there's a place for charter schools. And there's 7 reasons that the state identifies for a charter school to exist. And just simply, I mean, innovation, new ideas, bringing new people to bear on an old topic, new kind of energy. It just makes sense to me that you have that kind of outlet. The problem is that all of that innovation, all of those new ideas, all of the thinking of allowing teachers to practice their craft at different kinds of levels with different kinds of ideas is all lost now. I don't think we're doing the kind of things that we thought we were doing. Charter schools, to a large extent now, are creating programs now so that certain kids can get out of the system. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Let's take Twin Rivers for an example. And I know we're talking about Sac City, but Twin Rivers really tells the best story. When you look at Twin Rivers, you find out that most of the charter schools that they have are charter schools that service white students. Matter of fact, you'll find that in Twin Rivers, only 7%, 5 to 7% of their charter schools have African American participation. And when you look at Latinos, it's only 10 to 12% participation. Their charter schools have effectively locked out the very people that what we're seeing is too much of that. Now you get to a point like me, an excellent administrator when I was working, I can't get a charter school. I can't get a charter school with my skill set simply because there's now political reasons that people get charter schools. I mean, there's political clout you now have to carry to get a charter school, which means I could be the lady down the street that's a Boy Scout leader, or a man down the street that's a Boy Scout leader. Now, had no experience in education, but if they can get the political clout together, get 4 board members to go along with their plan, they can get a charter school. Whereas you take me, an old veteran, getting that political capital is a lot more difficult, because if I get in and I'm successful, and I can do what they can't do, it makes them look bad. So they avoid people like me, and they reach out to people that don't even have anywhere close to my experience level. And so I think we're moving into an area that we really don't want to move in, where people are getting charter schools who don't have the competency to run.
Why is there such a contentious atmosphere that continues around the issue of fixing schools? I know people in the community want to fix them. We've got good people that want to volunteer to fix them. Why is there so much contention around? I believe everybody's seeing the prize as fixing the schools, but there's a sort of a fight. It's kind of an uphill battle.
I don't know. That's a difficult question, because what you really have, having been in the system, both at the central office and on the school site, what you really have is, and I believe genuinely, people really think they're doing the right thing. They just don't understand sometimes that what they've chosen to do may not be the thing that's necessary to really make a fix. And the people who are in the community who are receiving the service, they look at it as, they're tired. When is it going to be fixed? When will it impact my kid positively? And I think that provides some enmity of some sort. It's just very difficult situation. When we look at schools, we're talking about 30 to 40 years. They have not changed. They're still producing what they produced 30 years ago. Or their lack of production is still a lack of production 30 years later. And we don't seem to be able to identify what we need to do and provide services around it. Too often, your leadership changes. It's not consistent. Sometimes you go through 3 or 4 years of changing leaders, and you always keep starting over again, where you're getting to the point now that some people say, well, we've already done that, or I remember that.
When you talk about changing leaders, are you talking about school board members, superintendent, executive level people?
I think all of the above. What happens? You change the board. Sometimes you change the superintendent. That just by bringing in new board members, that's enough sometimes to change the superintendent. You change the superintendent wants to work with their own people. Now you've changed central office where. But there's a book that's entitled Leading with Equity. And what you see happening, they have 140,000 kids in this particular school district. But they had 10 years with the same superintendent. He came in with an idea. And it's taken 10 years for that idea to matriculate all the way down to where schools are now, actually 5 years, where schools are actually working with many of the principals that he had designed in his initial concepts. And so now everybody in the district is configured around that main goal, that idea of working with kids who have a long history of failure. And they've been able to be successful, but they had a 10-year run at it. We have to find the same kind of stability in our district, not only with the board, but with the superintendent and all those who are connected with it.
Until I move to kind of the final 3 questions, I'm going to let you think about this one for a minute. I want you to tell the audience something that might surprise them, some story, something that would just surprise the average citizen to hear about in regards to schools. But maybe while you think about that, I'll ask you, if you had that magic wand, what is the top three things, what top three things would you change about the Sacramento school system?
If there were three things, I think the first thing I would change, I would make sure that central office didn't create work in a vacuum. It just seems to me they end up spending as much time they spend in the central office than they spend on campuses. They need to really get a feel for who their kids are. They need to really get a feel for what's actually happening on those campuses. And they need to develop relationships with the people who are in charge of those campuses. I think to a much more thorough extent than they have in the past. I think it's easier to make decisions when you have a real opportunity to see what people are actually accomplishing or not accomplishing. Sometimes we get stuck downtown administering, and I don't think that gets us to answer the kind of answers that we need. And I'm not once a month going to a school campus. That's not what I'm talking about. We need to really figure out what's going on our campuses. And I think if there's anything that would surprise us is how kids are managed on campus. I think that would be the biggest surprise for people. Where schools have management systems that just simply don't work. And they won't work because there's no accountability on how students are managed from when they get to school to when they leave. I think we need to do a lot more work relative to what kids do in classrooms and what they can. And I stay with the management because when I'm on campuses, I spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on. And being a veteran, you can see quickly the extent that teachers are actually struggling with the student population that they have. And when I say struggling is that it seems to me that the system is already fixed. And when I mean system is already fixed, I mean it's already been written. And what you're doing is you're taking kids who are round, you're taking a school system which is square, and you're trying to force this round peg into the square hole. The system wasn't designed, on the school campus that I'm talking about, the system wasn't designed for the kids that are there. And it seems that they're always at odds. And so what you find out is schools are pushing them out because they don't fit. And they're ending up in other kinds of programs. Typically when kids get pushed out of middle and high school, they tend to not graduate. And most kids then have to think for themselves. And try to, do other kinds of things too.
I'm sorry we had to end this episode so abruptly, but we had a 30-minute airtime limit. You can see more of Darryl's interview on our webpage at www.ourglobalvoice.com. And thanks for watching.